Hi everyone, it's Tox from Crits Happen. Thanks for watching and welcome back. When I was growing up, I was about an hour and a half north of New York City, which made for great adventures as I got older. I was able to strategize and plan and put together the perfect 12-hour days. I was able to get the first train, watch the sunrise, go to Battery Park, play people in chess, run over to FAO Schwartz, pick up the latest toys and collectibles, duck and dodge traffic and people on foot to get to Yankee Stadium and watch a game, which unfortunately back then usually meant a loss. But I loved Don Mattingly and I got to see him and cheer until my lungs were about to burst. Then on the way out, grab a pizza from my favorite place, down a slice, hop the last train, and get home and have an amazing adventure all in one day. New York City itself has a very big aura. It has excitement, adventure, and danger awaiting around every corner you peer your head around. Very much like the city of Waterdeep from Dungeons & Dragons. Lords of Waterdeep took the gaming community by storm last year. It was a European-style worker placement game brought out by an American publisher with a wonderful, wonderful set of components, artwork, and a beautiful theme offering you adventure, excitement, and danger around every corner. We gave it a crit and most of the community agreed that it was an absolutely wonderful game. If you'd like to see it played, you can check out a recent video from Geek and Sundry with Will Wheaton and Tabletop where they showed you a 4-player game about how exciting and how engaging and social this type of game can be. But we're here for a new reason. We're here to talk about Scoundrels of Skullport, which is the very first expansion for Lords of Waterdeep. Is it still exciting? Is it still adventurous? Is it still dangerous? And more importantly than anything, is it still fun? Well, this is actually 2 modules in one. There is the Undermountain, which is a dangerous area underneath the city of Waterdeep. And then there's Skullport itself, which is going to offer you some great rewards, but at the risk of corrupting your soul. Let's take a look at both modules, see how they stand on their own and how they stand together combined with this game, which now goes all the way up to 6 players. Come with me. Grab your most dangerous rogues, your strongest fighters, your most pious clerics, and your most powerful wizards, and let's jump into the world of Lords of Waterdeep, Scoundrels of Skullport. So before we get started with Scoundrels of Skullport, if you're unfamiliar with how Lords of Waterdeep works as a game, I highly suggest to take some time to look at our critical review from last year or the most recent tabletop episode from Geek and Sundry, which does a great job of showing how engaging and how fun and exciting the original Lords of Waterdeep can be. So what new things does Scoundrels of Skullport bring to an already great game of Lords of Waterdeep? Well, the first one you're looking at here is the module called Skullport. There is a second module inside of this called the Undermountain, which we'll show you in a second. Before we jump into either module though, it's good to know that you get an entire new faction to play called the Grey Hands. Now if you notice, there's 6 meeples or 6 agents that are here in gray. In addition, you get an additional meeple of each of the original 5 colors from the game for 2 very good reasons. Number 1, the game is expanded to 6 players. And number 2, there are now rules for a longer game. So for those of you that felt that with 8 turns there was really never enough to get that engine going, there are opportunities now because there are so many spaces, which we'll talk about in a second, that you're going to be able to use more agents and play a longer, more deeply fulfilling game. So let's take a look at Skullport. In both cases, the modules provide you new buildings, new lords, new intrigue, and new quests, but they do so in very different ways. Skullport brings two new boards to the game. These are placed nearby the original Lords of Waterdeep board, which is good to know. This isn't a standalone expansion. You have to have the original Lords of Waterdeep to be able to play this. Skullport provides 3 new action spaces for you to place your meeples or your agents on and gain rewards. This, for example, the Slaver's Market, allows you to take 2 fighters, 2 rogues, and a corruption. Now something key about the game is whenever something tells you to take corruption, you don't really have a choice. It's not a positive resource depending on the situation you're in. As you notice along the Skullport track of corruption here, you've got 1 corruption on -1 and 3 corruption tokens on every other space, counting all the way up to -9. When you take corruption, you pull one off and put it inside of your tavern, just like any other resource, like a rogue, like a fighter, like a priest, or like a wizard. However, at the end of the game, each corruption token that is still inside your tavern is going to be worth negative points equal to the highest space on the corruption track people have taken corruption from. So, if we were to take everything off all the way up to -3 throughout our game, at the end of the game, if I had 5 corruption tokens in my tavern, I would score -15 points. So corruption is a press your luck style mechanic. Now the good thing is, just because you take corruption doesn't mean it's always bad. The whole concept of the buildings, the intrigue cards, and the quests involved with Skullport are going to allow you to manipulate your corruption. Sometimes they're really beneficial and they let you put corruption back onto the corruption track. Sometimes they're not that beneficial and you're removing them from the game, which while they will get them out of your tavern, they're still going to be worth negative points. It's all about risk and reward with Skullport. Do I really need to go to the Hall of the Voice, gain a quest, gain an intrigue, gain 5 money, and gain that corruption? Or could I use 2 or 3 agents to possibly do the same thing in other spaces? One of my favorite spaces is Skull Island. It's 2 of any cube and a corruption. This can dramatically swing a game. Of course, the more corruption you take, the higher your negative points. A very good majority of the intrigue and quest cards require you to manipulate corruption, move it off your tavern back to the corruption track, or completely eliminate it from the game. There are some that require your opponents to have more corruption than you, or some that can help you if you have more corruption than someone else. And in addition to that, there's one lord that is actually going to give you points at the end of the game for every corruption that's in your tavern. If you play it right, you can offset the 2 between the negative points and the positive points that they're able to net you. Now let's talk about the Undermountain. Buried underneath Waterdeep is the Undermountain. And the Undermountain is all about attracting adventurers who put their risks and their lives out there for the hopes of great reward. The Undermountain is very similar to Skullport in that it has a board that goes next to the Lords of Waterdeep board, providing 3 new spaces to play agents and gain rewards. In the Hall of Mirrors case, you can get 1 of any cube, or a fighter and a rogue. The entry well allows you to obtain a quest from Cliffwatch Inn and play an intrigue card. And then the Grim Statue allows you to gain 2 intrigue cards. All very, very powerful spaces. Now what's good to note is that while the corruption is a big mechanic inside of the Skullport module, the idea of taking resources and putting them back into play onto the board is a big mechanic inside of Undermountain. So for example, this building that's face up, Trobian's Graveyard, tells you when you place an agent there, after it's been built of course, that the person who places their agent can draw 2 intrigue cards and gain 4 money. However, you're going to have to discard 2 intrigue cards. So there's a little bit of give and take. Then in a larger building, the Lost Cavern tells you that you can discard a non-mandatory quest. And if you do, you get a fighter, a rogue, and any other cube resource that you want. And then finally, the Shadow Dusk Hold gives you 4 rogues. However, you have to place a rogue from the supply on each of 2 different action spaces. Now that means you can place an actual rogue on the Hall of Mirrors and on the entry well. You could place them on spaces on the main board as well, inside of the original Lords of Waterdeep. And what that means is, if another player places their agent on a space that has resources already on it, they not only get the reward for placing their agent, but they get to take those resources as well. So while this would give you 4 rogues, there's a good chance that somebody else is going to benefit by getting rogues as well. This is a really interesting and neat concept, and I actually like it a little more than the concept of corruption, because there's a lot of give and take of what is going to benefit me, but what is the potential of my opponents going to benefit. In addition, depending on how many players are in the game, this can become a very interesting mechanic to manage. Now, it is good to note that none of the buildings, none of the quests, and none of the intrigue cards in the Undermountain have anything to do with corruption. That is solely, completely confined to the Skullport module. And just like that, the concepts of placing resources back onto spaces is only confined inside the Undermountain. But the big thing is you can combine both of these together. Let's take a look and talk a little bit about what that means. Now, when we're talking about combining modules, if I want to play with just Skullport or just Undermountain, it's simple. I take all the buildings, shuffle them in with the original buildings, all of the intrigue, shuffle them in with the original intrigue, and all of the quests, and shuffle them in with the original quests. It makes for a good combination of the original gameplay mechanics and the new gameplay mechanics where things don't get too unbalanced. If I wanted to play with Skullport, I would do the same thing. And in each case, respectively, I would only use the boards associated with the modules that I'm going to be playing with. However, if I want to combine them both together, I have to do a little manipulation to the original game. What I would have to do is take all of the intrigue cards from both modules, all of the quests from both modules, and all of the buildings from both modules, shuffle them in with half of the original sets of cards. So I would half the original intrigue deck, half the original quest deck, and half the original building stack, taking out some potential very fun and very game impacting maneuvers, put them back into the box, then combine everything together. Now, this is very fun. This is also very chaotic, as while Skullport allows you to manipulate corruption and the Undermountain allows you to manipulate resources, shuffling everything together doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have those abilities when you want, as you need them to develop your strategy. So, each module can be played on its own with the base set or combined together with half of the base set to make for a complete gigantic game. So that's Scoundrels of Skullport. Now, I'm going to apologize in advance. This may be a little more critical of a critical review than we normally do. I've been accused in the past of using the word critical incorrectly because we don't necessarily pick things apart. But in this one, I think we may. So the first thing that we always look at is components. Now, the artwork is gorgeous on these cards, on the buildings, on the actual player boards. It looks great, just like the original Lords of Waterdeep did. The card stock is tremendous. There were some interesting choices, though, in the components that make me scratch my head. The first one are these player boards. Now, they're cool because they're small and they're easy to fit next to the board, which the original board is gigantic. However, the two main boards with the agent spaces on them are completely wrapped on cardboard. The corruption track is not, and as you can see, we'll show you some up closes of ours, our corners are already, after maybe 10 to 11 playthroughs, already fraying and beat up. And that was a little disappointing. It's almost as if this was produced on a different line than the two agent space boards, which is really interesting. Now, Ninja Zach pointed something out. The fact that it's a corruption track makes sense that it should become corrupted, which I thought was kind of comical. However, the collector in me really doesn't like to see things that get damaged that easily, and it's not like there is a sleeve that we can put this in. So that was a little interesting. The tokens for the skulls are really cool. They did a really good job with those. The box. Well, let's get into this. So the box is interesting. The box does have the same insert style that the original Lords of Waterdeep had. You've got spaces for meeples, spaces for tokens. One of the nice things they did, which I thought was really good, was they give you these tokens of 5. So if I have 5 priests in my tavern, I can just take this and put some of the cubes back in the supply, which was kind of nice. But as you can see, there's a spot for corruption tokens. There's 4 different channels for cards, so I can separate my intrigue, quest, and buildings between intrigue, quests, and buildings here on one side for the Undermountain, and intrigue, quests, and buildings on the other side for Skullport. However, they're not deep enough, and this is really weird. I don't know if I just have an early copy of the game or what exactly happened, but for example, the 2 channels that hold the buildings, they don't fit in there. If I take one stack and put it in here, you'll notice that it doesn't really fit correctly. And even if it does, it can slide around possibly because this one building is right there at the top and can easily move around. In fact, in most cases, because there's no big board like there was inside of Lords of Waterdeep, there's nothing to hold these down in place, so they do tend to shuffle around and move around a lot. Had this well for the buildings and the cards been just slightly deeper, it would have held everything in place, I think. So if you're like me and you put games, on their side or vertically up and down and not flat, this one may actually sprawl about a bit inside the box. That was a little bit of a disappointment. And the only reason I say that, and people may think it's a little nitpicky, is the original Lords of Waterdeep box was superbly done. It was one of the best inserts at its time and still is one of the best inserts in terms of holding all the chits, the bits, the tokens, the wood cubes, all the cards, everything involved. Never once have I opened this and had things sprawled out inside of it. Unfortunately, every time I've opened this, that has happened. So that was a little bit of a disappointment. So artwork-wise, beautiful. Component quality-wise, some questions as to why they did that. But overall, I would definitely give it above average. For most games that are out there, this one really does look good, feel good. One of my favorite things about Lords of Waterdeep is the texture of the cards and kind of the graininess of them, and they've done a great job with that here. But again, one more odd thing about these cards. When you combine them together with the original quest and the original intrigue cards, and again, this may just be because I got an earlier copy of the game, these are just ever so slightly longer, to where when you shuffle them, you can feel the difference in width of the cards or length of the cards when you're shuffling them. That was a little disappointing because I don't want to sleeve these cards as much as I do like sleeving and protecting my cards. This is some of the best card stock I've ever seen, and it just is something that I like the texture of, and I didn't want to do that. So if you sleeve your cards, shouldn't be a problem. If you don't, just may require a little bit different shuffling in how you do it. Now let's talk about the gameplay mechanics. So the first thing is that each board provides you with 3 new action spaces to go to, which is really cool. When you play in one big game, you actually get 6 because you're playing with both boards. The mechanics are really cool. The corruption track is awesome in terms of pressing your luck of how much corruption you're going to get, how much corruption your opponents get, what quests and what intrigue cards you can get to help you manipulate the corruption. It is press your luck, and it's a great way to do it. I was worried that this was going to add too much analysis paralysis to the game and people trying to decide, do I take it, do I not take it? But this is really well implemented. The choices are very simple between the 3 action spaces you get on the board and the action spaces that you get from the buildings. They're straightforward, and they do present you choices, but not so many choices that you feel like you have to sit here adding for 15 minutes to figure out, do I take that one more corruption or do I not? They've done a very good job with that. On the flip side, on the Undermountain, I actually enjoy this more. I love the concept of taking resources for yourself to benefit you and potentially leaving resources out in the wild for you to obtain and get even more of a benefit, or your opponents to obtain. And it becomes a devilish strategy inside of the game in terms of placing those resources on places you don't think your opponent wants to go, so that they will be forced to go there and capture those extra resources, or leave you to get them and gain even greater benefits on your own. This is a superbly done module in my opinion. There's many quests and intrigue cards that are going to allow you to manipulate that, and sometimes, if left unchecked, there can be 1 or 2 spaces with quite a bit of extra resources and a huge benefit to somebody if they time it right. And again, they've done it in a simple fashion to where the choices are obviously apparent as to what's good and what's a challenge, but not so much risk and reward that you're stuck in analysis paralysis and still never feel like you're just linearly playing a game going, okay, this is where I need to go. There's risks, there's rewards in both modules. Now, that said, let's get into the experience. The experience of playing these 2 modules individually and the experience of playing them together. Individually, they're great. I absolutely love the Undermountain. The rewards are amazing, the risks are high, there's a lot of challenges going on. With Skullport is really about manipulating that corruption track as best as possible. Each one on their own provide a great experience. However, combined together, it provides an interesting experience. If I were to grade this game purely on one module versus another module, they both would get very, very high ratings. Together, it's interesting. And here is the only drawback I've been able to find with this expansion. When you combine both of these together and you're playing with less than 4 players, there's not a lot of competition. There are tons of spaces to go to, tons of buildings, tons extra, you get 6 extra spaces. And really the only challenge in a less than 4, I'll say 3 or 2 player game is money. But even then, there are so many things inside of the Undermountain to be able to get money out on the board from a resource perspective. It really is not too competitive. And that left most of us playing 2 and 3 player games in a position where we didn't feel like there was as much competition or much stressful challenges like there should be inside of a worker placement game. At the end of a game, if you feel as though you weren't challenged as to where you were going to place your workers to get the best benefit, it's not usually as fun. And unfortunately, our experiences have been that in a 2 and 3 player game only when you're combining them all together. Now, when you're looking at combining them together in a 4, 5, and 6 player game, watch out. It's a ton of fun. When you get that many people around a table for Lords of Waterdeep, add in the 6th player, add in the corruption, add in all the resource manipulation in Undermountain and all the risks and rewards, it is a throwdown, competitive, highly stressful, highly fun, energizing, engaging game. It has just taken what was Lords of Waterdeep and blown it completely, pardon the pun, out of the water from Skullport Harbor. The one thing that's a little interesting to note are the lords. There's 3 lords with each module, and from my experience, 1 or 2 of them are a little more powerful than the others. For example, and this one is just really interesting. I always love looking at this picture. It's the Xanthar who's on the front box. He says at the end of the game, you score 4 victory points for each corruption token in your tavern. Now, throughout the gameplay, there's only going to be one person that's going to be able to get that advantage. So if you're playing a 5 and 6 player game, if each player takes, let's say, 2 corruption tokens each, that's going to get you to 12 corruption tokens, which is the -4, -5 area. Me, as that lord, would get my points back, but everybody else would not, and that's a huge swing in that type of game. So on larger games, there are some lords that are a little bit unbalanced in play style, and there's some things that I think people could take advantage of and really pull out ahead inside of those games. But if those are the only things that we're critical about from a gameplay perspective, then we're doing pretty darn good. I've probably been a little more critical on the actual components than most people would be, but I always like to point out the things that I notice when I play these games with my friends and with my family. One nice thing that I really did like about this is that there is not a steeper learning curve for younger children. Ninja Zach, our youngest gamer who's 8 years old, had no problem picking up on some of the strategies inside of this, whether it was corruption or whether it was the resource and risk management inside of the Undermountain. That was something I was a little concerned about. I thought as they developed new mechanics and new gameplays for the original game, it might push it up a scale, but he's had no problems whatsoever, and we've introduced this to other younger kids who are 9, 10 years old, had no problems whatsoever. Because of the theme, it draws people in, and again, they have delivered. So at the end of the day, Lords of Waterdeep, Scoundrels of Skullport is going to get a crit from Crits Happen. It's a wonderful expansion in either module on their own. It is good to note, like we said, when you combine them together, a 2 or 3 player game may not be as competitive, but still will be quite as fun. But opens up the world to 6 players and allows you to have a wonderful evening sitting around a game board playing a great game with great people. We hope that you enjoyed this critical preview. We'd love to hear from you. Feel free to leave your comments below on the YouTube channel. You can of course chime in on Facebook, on Twitter, and Google Plus by searching Crits Happen or at our homepage at critshappen.com. But one final note that I'm really excited about. We just crossed 1,000 likes on our Facebook page, and to celebrate, we're going to be giving away a copy of Lords of Waterdeep, Scoundrels of Skullport to one of our followers on Facebook. If you'd like to jump in, definitely join the conversation. It's facebook.com/critshappen. We're also dangerously close on Twitter to crossing 1,000 followers, which when we do, we'll be giving away something special for them. And in addition, we're about to cross 5,000 subscribers here on YouTube. Once that happens, we'll have another surprise as well. So if you're not following us on Facebook, on Twitter, or here subscribed on YouTube, definitely jump in, because the people who like us, the people who follow us, and the people who subscribe to us are the ones that are going to get entered into the random drawing for our contests. Very shortly, we'll be announcing who our Facebook winner is for Scoundrels of Skullport. But until we see you next time, we hope you enjoy this critical review. Thank you so much for watching. Keep rolling those dice, and we hope they're all crits.